So that, in theory, has started.
Yes.
We will gather this, but obviously it'll be subject to any kind of redaction and re-editing before we actually issue it, possibly in the early part of next week. So here we go. This is a global conversation club. The Conversation Club in the UK, in cahoots with the College of Performance Management, with Becky Wilson, Winston from there. I was thinking of Jackie Wilson, the president, the current president of CPM, and a great friend. Joining us for today's conversation is John Driessnack, who I think has been a president and has been around almost as long as I have, or even longer, in the great project management world, trying to make things better, improve things, and also notably coming up with ideas, not just sitting there waiting for somebody to figure out what the hell to do. So it should be a fascinating 45 minutes, an hour or so. We'll run till about 6 o'clock. John will be taking us through something that I'm certainly going to be fascinated by, the more strategic dimension of project management, multi-dimensional portfolio management. Definitely a part to play for all levels of projects, but feeding into multi-dimensional portfolio management. So I will hand over to John, who has got control. Feel free.
Now, just a minute.
Feel free to chip in, stick your hand up or shout out if you've got a question to ask. John's very happy to take questions. And just like Becky's demonstrated, she wants to say a few words too. So please go ahead, Becky. Welcome.
It's hard to break in on you, Steve.
Yeah,
good to see you. Exciting morning.
I did that deliberately. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that the College of Performance Management is really pleased to have John, our current past president, speaking to the GCC, and also to present something he's been working on for quite a while. So I appreciate that. John and I have had several conversations within the project management arena, and I'm really pleased to see some emphasis on portfolio management. It's an oft-ignored area. So I appreciate it. And if you have questions, just ask John as he goes along. Raise your hand, and he'll be happy to entertain them or to get back to you with a more definitive answer if he doesn't have one on the spot. So we appreciate all your attendance, and John, you're up.
Okay. So, Steve, can everybody see the charts?
I can definitely see them. So
okay,
it's looking good.
So
I'm keeping an eye on the chat as well. So
so two things I'm going to kind of intermix. The research I've been doing at the Project Management Center of Excellence at the University of Maryland, we've dubbed that multidimensional portfolio management. And you'll, by the end of this session, you have an idea of what that means. In a more generic sense, I think we're in an era of we are migrating from, I think, the traditional portfolio management, what I would call project portfolio management. And we're migrating now to, I think some people in the industry are referring to, in a generic sense, of strategic portfolio management. And so we'll go through and talk about what that means and what the differences are down that line. This is the abstract for this. The link in here takes you to my research page at the University of Maryland, which has some of the papers that were done as part of some research that was funded by the Department of Defense, and we'll go through some of that. What I'm going to do is level set everybody on what do we mean, and we're going to use the ANSI standard for portfolio management, and that migration from project to strategic kind of setup, and where PMI is with all that, where that's evolving. And then the example I'm going to use is Department of Defense, which is a very large portfolio management organization. I mean, there are literally over 100 what we call program executive officers that really are portfolio managers over a grouping of programs. And on average, I would say those portfolio managers are managing over $1 billion in execution every year. Their asset set is multi-billions of dollars, right? So it's a very, very large, I don't think there's any organization in the world that's going to be larger than what the Defense Department has and current investments that's going on. So I'll give you a little rundown of that and then talk about this multi-dimensional kind of setup and kind of try to relate it back to what I think will be helpful no matter where you are in industry and in government. And then I'll just talk a little bit about how the schema is moving along, the complexity of the models that we see happening with like scheduling and risk and cost and those kind of things, and some of where maybe the software ought to be going, the planning and programming software that we use and those kind of things. And I'll end with a little discussion about, I just recently wrote a paper for PMI referred to as Winning in the 21st Century. If you Google that on the PMI website, there was one from 2017 that kind of talked about the Department of Defense going to a portfolio approach. And now that is actually going to happen here in 2025. And we wrote another paper kind of over to the US Congress about using standards and doing some good setup for that. So we'll walk through those. The charts are rather dense. I agree with that. So I'm going to go through. They're meant to be good resources for you. I'm going to skim at them at the top. If you have questions, please ask away. So the first thing I want to say is, right, the portfolio standard, this is what's on the left is the 3rd edition, and what's on the right is the 4th edition that came out in 2017, right? And the migration to not only to performance domains, but also there was strategic management and governance in there, and then performance management in the 3rd edition. But if you go look over on the right-hand side, we now move to this portfolio value management, right? We still have governance, we still have strategic management. We now have a stakeholder engagement gets added in. And then the other major area that gets added in the upper right-hand corner is that capacity and capability. What is the capacity of the organization? In other words, how much can you do, and what's the capability you have to work within the portfolio that you're in? And that's really, to me, taking this at a more strategic level. You're not just a collection of a bunch of projects. It's a more important setup in the portfolio manager looking at their capacity and capability to figure out what value they're going to provide under some governance structure across the life cycle. So if you haven't looked at the 4th edition of the standard, I would encourage you to go back and take a look at it. And I think we're going to keep evolving down this path to be less of just a collection of projects, to have a more strategic kind of approach. And that's where the Defense Department's going to go in this next round under this new administration. So just to highlight this a little bit, just what are those performance domains? So this gives you a little idea of that in some of this setup where we get into multi-dimensional. So the first thing I want to note is the strategic management part of this is to actually write a strategic management plan across your portfolio. And so what we did in the research project is we went and looked at that and said, well, how would be the best way to kind of break that out for a large organization like the Defense Department? And we ended up using Michael Porter's value chain in his book, The Competitive Advantage, that concept. So if you're not familiar with that, I'll show you a couple charts on that. I think it's a very good way if you're looking at portfolios and you're going to look across your organization, is to look at that at the value chain. And then that will drive your governance structure, your stakeholder engagement, and also help you with value management. What is that long-term value that you're expected to get? Because that should come from your strategy document. So it's not just a program plan or a project plan. You're now writing a strategy document. And so that's why I see industry starting to use this strategic portfolio management. It's not just a collection of projects and programs. We actually have an overall strategy. And again, the important part of that is the capacity and capability. That's really the new area where you're optimizing value by determining what kind of synergies you want to get across all your components by having them in your portfolio, right? What is your portfolio adding? 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing. Where are you adding synergy? And that you have to sit back and have a strategy about that to go do that. So just a reminder, PMI, right? This is the left-hand side comes out of the standard. We have portfolios over top of both operations in projects and programs. So remember that your portfolio management can be not just projects, a collection of projects and programs, but also operations. And it's interesting in the Defense Department, the system manager for, like, let's say the F-35 owns all the systems in the field. They own all the systems. They have users, but they own the configuration of all the systems. In essence, they are system managers, not just program managers, right? So that becomes very important in the Defense Department. And then on the right-hand side is just that chart that shows you that portfolios can work for portfolios, projects can work for other projects, right? It's not just this hierarchy. You have one portfolio, a couple projects have programs, and that's the only structure. So keep that as an open mind as you go through, and that's in the standard as we will talk about. So then we have the classic portfolio optimization. This is just one example. This is a drug company, looking out several years about what drugs are coming off their system, what drugs do they need to be bringing in, what investments are they making, and they're trying to look at their risks, what schedules they need to be following, and maximize revenue and profit. And that's a classic, what I would say, portfolio management. Almost if you go back to what I'll refer to as stock portfolio management, right? If you have a stock portfolio, here's all your stocks, you're balancing risk, those kind of things. That term of portfolio management really came out of that kind of managing risk in the stock market and what kind of portfolio you're going to put together. And some of that is very true. I think when we talk about project portfolio management, people do that. They look at the number of projects they have and those kind of things. But we're really looking here to go beyond this classic methodology and start talking about the synergies that you're going to produce. You're going to produce more than the sum of the parts, and that's not typically true in a project portfolio kind of approach that we've traditionally worked out. All right, so that kind of sets the stage. Now what I want to talk about is let's go talk about a little bit about the Defense Department problem that they have. So this is
John,
yes,
this is Becky. What metrics are you putting in place through this to allow one to verify that you are indeed achieving the synergy that you have targeted?
Yeah, good question. And what I would say is in the Defense Department, at least now, in most places I look across the US federal government, there's not a lot of those measures. And so without writing a strategy to figure out what your goal is, how do you know what to measure? So until you not just have 8 projects that you're doing in the portfolio, you have measures on the individual 8 projects. Now it's what strategy are you trying to achieve? What goal are you objective you're trying to achieve? And now you can measure that. How do you take those 8 things that you're doing and get more out of them? And so you ought to be able to measure that.
I agree. So do you have separate brainstorming on what those metrics should be, and also continuing meetings to determine if they've morphed over time based on your strategies?
I see a continuous process going on here,
okay.
Whether that's an annual strategy update and those kind of things. And some of the things you'll see that people are talking about in the Defense Department, where we would be setting program baselines for the next, here's the F-35, here's its baseline to develop it over the next 12 years. And people going, well, maybe that ought to be a rolling wave baseline.
Okay.
And so this acceptance of we can't necessarily see that far, and we're going to have interim baselines along the way and keep looking at what the strategy is, because the need for the aircraft may be changing given the changing nature of the world.
Well,
And
they,
that's
they
not,
absolutely know that's happened in the past, so.
yeah, and I know that's not necessarily true just in the Defense Department. I mean, most industries aren't going to look the same 5 or 6 years from now. So if you're setting baselines way out there, that can definitely be a problem. Daryl, you have a question?
Yes, John, just wanted to ask, are you using AI? And I know that's a no-no in this webinar, but has AI been incorporated or in some fashion be of
No,
assistance?
this is more of a theory where we're going to try to implement. I'm
Mhm.
not, this is not a presentation of, we've been doing this for 5 years and here's the results. Okay, so this is
Okay.
an area that I would say, Daryl, that AI is not going to give me very much help because AI has nothing to read to help bring together for me and give me new ideas on this. So the chart you have here, Advana is the advanced analytics system they have in the Defense Department to try to pull all the different desperate kind of things together. On the right-hand side is the way the Joint Staff looks at the force structure. On the left-hand side is how at the Office of the Secretary of Defense looks at the portfolio level. And one of the things this chart is kind of showing is that they don't line up, that the civilian oversight world doesn't line up with the Joint Staff side of the world. And so all those acronyms on the right-hand side, the TMTR, the IAPR, those are all different kind of portfolio reviews that go on in the Defense Department. And it's just a mess because things don't align. People aren't looking at requirements and resources, and then the project management of it all kind of in the same kind of structure. So that's the other thing that's coming along here is you got to have a strong governance structure and get people to look at the problem all in the same way, in that way. Becky, do you have another question?
Yeah, so in order to do that, is there going to be any realignment of how those reviews are done at the program level to make them merge to have this alignment? Because I mean, requirements are separated from risks, they're separated, you've seen the review cycles at the Pentagon. Is there going to be any realignment of what you're doing down at the lower end to feed this?
Yeah, I would say the apple cart has been tossed over to the side and kicked over. And so, yeah, there's a tremendous realignment that's coming around. So
Okay.
how that will shake out in the end, you have both on the House side and the Senate side, you have laws that are being passed that will be passed sometime this fall, in what's called the National Defense Authorization Act, that's going to change the rules of the game.
Right.
And you have the executive order that President Trump put out in April that is already causing some of the rules of the game to change. And so some of those things I can talk about. Some of those things it's internal. They haven't made final decisions yet, but I can just tell you that the process is well going down the path. We are going to move to a portfolio approach because both the House and the Senate want to do it, and the executive branch wants to do it. So there's basically, so unless someone goes to the Supreme Court or something, this is going to happen. We're going to move from managing across 1,000+ major programs to managing across what I think is going to become somewhere around 250 what we'll call capability portfolios. So here's an example. This is PEO-IWS, Integrated Warfare Systems at NAVC. This is an old chart. This is not current. It's purposely old, so I don't get myself into any trouble. It's 10 years old. But what it does show you is in each of those quadrants is like a different type of capability. This program office has some 124 different programs. So they kind of are in these different portfolios, setups, but there's no way in the Defense Department to manage by those portfolios. We just manage by the individual program. The portfolio setups are just a collection of the programs. That is what is going to change, right? That is where you're going to have a portfolio manager in each one of these areas, and they're going to need to have a strategy document and how are they going to walk, down that path. And so what is happening. I call this kind of the who, what, when, where, why of where we are with this. There's the executive order, and then there's a SecDef memo that's come out on the requirements process. There's the House and Senate. They're called the SPEED and the Forged Act. If you want to Google that, you can look at the SPEED Act and the Forged Act, and you'll get what the House and the Senate are thinking. And these things will get passed in some form down that system. And basically, this is going to affect what we call in the U.S. Defense Department the decision support systems, the requirements process, the acquisition process, and the resource process, right? And so there's a lot of push. Part of the solution is to push things out of the senior level and push it down to the lower level, okay? And give more authority down at the lower level to integrate across those decision support systems. Again, that's kind of put it all in the same portfolio, requirements, resources, and then the acquisition of the programs that are in there. This is following some things. If you have been following the Defense Department, you might have heard about the Section 809 panel, which wrote a big report back in 2019. And then there was the Commission on the Planning, Programming, Budget, and Execution. And those two commission reports, the PBBE one just came out in 24, the 809 one came out in 2019. A lot of what those two reports are now going to be implemented into law, right? And so there is actually a portfolio directive called DoD Directive 704520. It has not been well implemented, portfolio management, and that is going to change. And this is where the unique part comes in the Defense Department, is we're going to start looking, we're starting to build what we'll call mission portfolios. And those are basically, what are the requirements? It's beyond the system portfolios or the technology portfolios. And a system provides me capabilities, like I have different kind of fighters. The fighter is a general capability, but then how do those fighters then support the mission? And so going back to the mission portfolio and understanding what all the missions we need to handle and what capability do I need to fix that? And then what systems do I need to fix the capability? And then what technology do I need to fix the systems? So this is where the multi-dimensional kind of side of it goes. And I think, if you're in an automobile manufacturer, you're trying to deliver trucks. I've got a General Motors truck myself, I've got an Avalanche 2500, it's about 20 years old, but it sits on the same chassis that the Suburban sits on. It has a common engine, right? But they make different kind of trucks for different missions, but they've made decisions about where the commonality is and where the uniqueness is. And following that saying that what technology affects what systems, the engines, the chassis, the bodies, the transmissions, give you particular capabilities that then get tailored into what missions you can go down. So I think there's a link here on how that's going to work. And I think there's a lot of learning we can do and how the Defense Department kind of ruffles through all of this. So this is Michael Porter's Value Chain. It's a book back from 1985 called The Competitive Advantage. And so there's two principal things you need to understand about this concept. One, that there are primary activities, lower right-hand corner, and then support activities, right? And so it's to think for the companies you're working for, the organization you're working for, what are really your primary activities? And then what are your secondary activities? If you're General Motors building that truck, your primary business isn't human resources, or even maybe not even technology development or procurement. Those are things you need to do, but they're not your primary function. Your primary function is to get that logistics, to buy those parts, run it through your operations, outbound logistics, go sell those trucks, do the marketing and sales, and then do services for those trucks. Because you're in the business of selling trucks. That's your value. And a lot of times we see portfolios, a lot of emphasis are put on the supporting activities and not on the primary activities, in essence, in there, right? And so the emphasis here for the Defense Department is we spend a lot of time looking at our portfolio of contracts, our portfolio of funding, our portfolio of programs. But managing programs isn't necessarily a primary function of the Defense Department, right? If we take that same concept, now we have emerging technology that goes into systems that go into operational units. Those operational units go do missions and doctrines through combatant commanders. That's the mission of the Defense Department. Follows the same kind of track, but a little bit differently. And then you still have all the things up top. You still have manpower and personnel and training and policies and decision-making processes. They're all important. But should we figure out a portfolio structure for those primary activities? And that's kind of what the research talked about. There was a discussion in the Defense Department about what should be our portfolio structure. And should we go with missions? Should we go with capabilities? Should we go with systems? That's the question we got asked as the research team. And we came back and told the Defense Department, yeah, you're right on all of them. It's not one or the other. You need to feed one to the other through your process. So that's kind of the approach we took. And that is getting some traction as we go through this. So what does this actually mean? There's decisions to be made in each of these areas. So this breaks it out a little bit more and kind of reverses it. Starts with the combatant commander down on the left, right? And then you drive back, well, what the combatant commanders have, what missions they need to do. That little red box with all those little boxes is actually a list of all the major mission areas. There's like 54 of them in the Defense Department at the very top level. We're doing 54 types of things. Those get broken into what we call mission threads. So how do you go do the mission? The mission that gets done by different operational units, right? That then have capabilities, and those capabilities come from particular systems. And so you have system centers that build systems, right? And you have program executive officers in those, right, that build those systems, make the investments to modify those systems. And then you go back to either industry or the Air Force Research Lab. This is kind of an Air Force oriented chart. Go back to the Air Force Research Lab and build a project. So if I reverse this, what technology should I be working on really shouldn't be dependent on just what the program manager wants, but it's what the program manager needs in their system to meet a particular capability in a force structure that's trying to do a mission. And so there's the thread. There's that multi-dimensional thread. And at each one of those stages, if you look at top, the little Rubik's cubes kind of things, there's decisions to be made. Because there's never only one combatant that can do the job. There's multiple missions different ways you can approach the mission. There's do I change the force structure? Do I change how I'm managing the capabilities? What systems do I have? And then what technology do I go for? It's a very complex process, especially when you consider how much money is being spent here. But we really don't have a good data system to walk through this and see this. And just to give you one example of that, just to kind of blows my mind a little bit, but kind of interesting from a scheduling point of view. Here's a decision model schema using scheduling and risk and cost, right? So think of the vertical track here. At the bottom, I have vendors that are building multiple systems that roll up into multiple programs that roll up into portfolios. Those portfolios go across to maybe what we call integrating portfolios, where we're trying to put a whole capability together that runs up to the whole service, right? We kind of have that, right? If you're doing earned value, we have major, the KC-46 or B-52 mod or F-22 mods or whatever. We have schedules that are delivered. Those schedules roll up into roadmaps and those kind of things. But what we don't have is which of these programs are important. If you look over on the right-hand side, which of these programs are important for a particular set of missions. So in those missions on the right-hand side, those 3 schedules over on the right-hand side, where are my holes and when do I need to fix those mission problems? And are the schedules on the left and the vertical going to meet that, what I'll say is kind of on the horizontal schedule? Becky, you have a question?
Yeah. No matter how big DoD is, there's still the issue that there just never is enough money. So are you using some type of weighted factor within all these decision processes? Because, you know, everybody's mission to them is primary. So I'm just.
So what we've had in the Defense Department up to this point is really who's kind of the personality that's driving decisions in the process instead of data.
Okay.
Right? Because we don't have a system to model all of this, right? We don't have a system that walks through and models across all these multiple dimensions. But that is in essence where we're going, right? There's been some work down that line. And as you can imagine, most of that work is done it gets to be highly classified, you know, right. So I can't really talk about it, but it's this kind of discussion of who's the combatant, what missions do they need to be done, where are our holes, right? You're not going to hear that talked about in some open forum, right? You know, what force structure changes are going to go on? How do we come back to which capabilities are more important? What are we working on? And I'll just say in general, we've had this categorization process that is based on how big you are.
Correct.
You're an ACAT 1 because you're $1 billion program. You're an ACAT 2, category 2 because you're only $500 million. And you're a little ACAT 3 because you're only $100 million. But what if that little $100 million program is the card in the platform that's passing the information from the $1 billion satellite to the $1 billion weapon? If you don't have the little card to pass the data, you might as well not have spent the money on the $1 billion satellite and the $1 billion weapon because your mission won't be successful. You might have had 2 very successful $1 billion programs on time, on target, great deliveries, everything else. But what's their value to the warfighter? Nothing.
Yeah, and you mentioned the past efforts on this. That was one of the holes in the past efforts. So thank you.
So there's a big push now to go look at the weapons side of this, or the mission side of this. And so you can visualize this is just kind of a little notional schedule that we've talked about. The way this sets up is in the top of the schedule, I have Indo-PACOM, the Pacific Commander, Indonesian and the Pacific Commander doing exercises. And every year they do an exercise, right? And so warfighters aren't going to necessarily incorporate new technology until they can exercise it. They know how they're going to use it. So then I have particular operational units in blue that are going to be a part of that exercise, who then are going to get upgraded systems in purple from their PEO, which are getting upgraded systems from the labs. So we don't have schedules, and I would contend we don't have standards on how to build this, what I'll call a horizontal schedule. A work breakdown structure isn't going to work here. We need a new ontology, and this is one of the things we're looking at. What is the ontology to be able to pass the lab schedule to the program schedule in the PEO to the operational unit schedule for when they get trained and ready to go to when they're going to show up at the exercise to when now the combatant commander actually has a new capability. The combatant commander doesn't have a new capability just because the lab passed the test or the program office delivered the first device. That's not it. You got to get all the way out to the combatant commander, right? And if the lab project is late, back here in 24, you're not going to get to the exercise in 27. You're not going to deliver the capability. Becky, you have a question?
Yeah, at one point, DoD, especially in the Air Force, was looking at doing some tabletops, exercises specifically designed at least to initiate conversations about this. And it would use an AI interface. Are they going to be doing any of that as they try to get the correct terminology and the integration to occur, or how are they approaching that?
I would say you could look at two levels thing. So I have a daughter that's a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. She's out at UCOM in Europe, right? In the ops center running ops every day, right? In Palantir has their software Maven there. And that can help. AI can help in that for what is today. What we're really talking about here is how do we change what we need for tomorrow or the next day or the next year or the next decade, right? And thus, what investments do I make today in technology to eventually get so the next lieutenant colonel 10 years from now has a different way of doing business?
Yeah, that was part of the mission of MDC2, but it got canceled. So, and it was out of Hancock. So that might be something to explore to see if there's any usable pieces and parts to help you guys.
Yeah,
that still exist.
I think there's been a lot of ad hoc things that are done, and so the as Steve said, I've been around a little while. I jokingly say, I can tell you my SPI and CPI and my Eagle project in 1973 because my father had me do earned value on my Eagle project. And had a schedule and everything else. So I've been doing this for a long time. But we have an ontology that we work in classic project and program management, which is the work breakdown structure in construction and those kind of things. But that doesn't necessarily scale when you get to a many-to-many kind of environment, right? We have this, one parent, to child kind of set up, right? We don't, in our WBS structure, when we go to this kind of structure, it's a many-to-many kind of thing, right? That fighter's doing multiple kinds of missions, that weapon's doing multiple kind of missions, right? It's just like on the factory floor, the engine that's in my truck is in a variety of different trucks, right? It's a common entity, right? The chassis may be common. The outside of the truck may look differently, different size beds, different size wheels, different size axles and everything else, but the chassis in the truck or the engine, in some ways there's limited options there, right? So there's all this different piecing kind of Lego setting it all together to one form. In the Defense Department, it's that game on steroids, right? And so we have to get to good data systems that can walk down that line. So my last two or so charts here are just a reminder of a study. I thought this was a fabulous study by the Arizona State University folks. There's a link to the Department of Energy and some of the papers talking about
John,
yes.
You've got a question from Mark there. He's got his hand up.
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, and he's just out here being a troublemaker anyway. That's what I do for a living. But a lot of what we're talking about in this goes back to clearly understanding the business drivers, the stakeholders, and the interdependency between not only programs and features, but individual final components and reuse. And I've been fighting this for my whole career. I've worked with multiple corporations that had no idea what the internal cost of development on their projects were. They didn't track employee costs because they were already paying their salaries, so it didn't matter. So they lost money everywhere. When you're talking about that little component that was only $100 million that's keeping a couple of $2 billion systems running, they had no idea what that cost was to develop any of those. So they only knew the potential benefit of each. And I, putting this all together, looking at the value chain you're talking about here, say, where is it? Where does it hand off? And we need to come up with a solution that can provide a view of all of those components and the portfolio itself based on the business drivers of the people looking without breaking the required processes and interdependencies.
Right. It's a very interesting thing. When you look at this, if we go backwards, right, on service to marketing and stuff like that, right? I have a son-in-law that, God, he speaks like 5 or 6 languages and stuff. So he does Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia, and he talks about how marketing the same product totally differently in different parts of the world.
Absolutely.
So you can look at that and go like, well, though you could put those marketing schemas into portfolios because they're little projects, right? Is what they are, marketing, right? But that's going to be different than the way the outbound logistics people ship those products out the door, which is going to be different than how they're made in operations, which is different than what the inbound logistics has to be. So the ideal here is a lot of times I hear people talking about, well, what portfolio structure should we use? And to me, the mind-blowing thing that came to me back in mid 2015, 16 or so, before I wrote the first paper for PMI on winning in the 21st century is, oh, there are multiple portfolio structures. Don't think there's one structure. And over that time, we've sit there and thought about, gone back to this. I mean, the best thing I have found is generically is this Michael Porter's value chain. It's very old, right? It's 40 years old. But I don't think there's anything better out there to basically say, like, okay, where do you get your value out of this? And the marketing guys provide a value. And so the portfolio of the marketing projects is going to be structured differently than the portfolio of the outbound logistics people who are operating differently than the logistics people that are doing the inbound stuff.
Well, you need something like this overarching structure, because what I face is everybody has their favorite tool.
Yep.
And most of their tools are insufficient even for their pet projects. But what was lacking is a framework to decide which tool to imply.
Yeah, and I like to be a little agnostic about the tool, and we need to talk about what the data set is.
Correct.
And
Correct.
what the ontology is. It's really getting to the point of what is the ontology. So if we go back to this study, one of the things that came out of this study for me, the Arizona State University did this. They looked at 33 major projects in the Department of Energy and looked at maturity on the bottom, on the x-axis, and the environment on the y-axis, right? How good the processes were is on the x-axis. How good was your scheduling, your cost estimating, all that good stuff, right? And then the environment was kind of like, was management paying attention to the data and actually using the data? And there's an amazing line that gets fit here. You can't have mature processes with management that's not using the data.
I could not argue against that, even if you paid me.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but when you say it, people are like, but here's a study that, Arizona State University did, the civil engineering department, right, went through and did this very rigid. I've read the dissertations, very well done. And it's really interesting. What comes on top out of this is risk management. Risk management is the thing that's, if you do risk management the best, you're up in that upper right-hand corner in the green, right? Kind of thing. And then if we combine that with the most recent study, I had the pleasure of participating with PMI's study on this project success. I encourage you all to read it, right? At PMI, just go Google project success. And this deliver value that was worth the effort and the expense. I had the pleasure of working on the V-22 program in my military career, and it always would drive me crazy when people would come and go, oh, your V-22's cost per flight hour is twice as much of the helicopter it was replacing, the H-46. Well, first thing, the H-46, by the time we were trying to replacement, was like 10,000 components loosely flying in formation. I mean, it was a very dangerous aircraft. But the V-22 went more than twice as fast as the H-46. So the fact that it was twice as much for cost per flight hour, it got the mission done in less than half the time. So it's the wrong measure. Right. So what's the value proposition? The value proposition for the military in a lot of ways is getting the job done quicker, safer. So we're measuring, a lot of times if we measure just on the project cost, schedule, performance, the baseline we set, that's not really the value proposition. We may value coming in on budget because that saves us from the problem, but V-22 is a great example that started, stop, had a lot of problems, had a lot of overruns. But when you look back on it, it's an unbelievable value to the world. If you're
right, you have the same people that argue that carrying a 9-track tape in your car across town is faster than Ethernet.
Yeah.
So, John,
Right.
do you have a statement that hooks value into mission,
Well,
or should there be?
It's kind of an interesting thing, right? So if I go back to that chart in this value proposition, I go back to this chart right here, this little purple chart, which is the hierarchy of the missions at the Joint Staff Level. There's 54 of those things. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is I think there's a different value proposition in each one of those boxes.
Yeah. The mission encompasses it. Yeah.
One of those boxes are medical missions. How do we get people out of the zone when they're injured? Yeah. Others are destruction. How do I destroy something?
Yeah.
Some of them are public affairs missions. How do I keep the people informed and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. So several missions, but isn't there one overarching mission as well, which is to get the job done properly?
Yeah, but that's you get too generic, and I think it's not a useful measure. Mm-hmm. I think you need to. This is the important thing about if we go back. I would say if we go back to the PMI standard, why put the strategy management on top, right? I think the most important thing, I mean, we had strategy over here managing, having a strategic plan and managing strategic change in the last. I had a charter and a roadmap, in that performance measures, but it was all geared towards cost schedule kind of performance kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think as we migrated into the performance domain in 2017, if you look at this a little bit differently, in changing the term to a value management, you understand the expected value. Now you look at your strategy that you're going to write. It's not just your strategy for cost, schedule, performance. It's that strategy that's kind of more on this value chain kind of setup. And then you look at the cream on the top is go look at this study PMI did. My God, they got input from 10,000 people worldwide. And those 10,000 people came back talking about, they mentioned delivering on time, but the overwhelming thing between both customers and practitioners, because it was a split between that and how they did the effort, was this, are you delivering value? And again, that value proposition, Steve, I think has got to be, this is where it's important to figure out how do you build your portfolios, not randomly. There has to be some purpose behind your portfolio so they can have that common value proposition.
Okay. Point of detail, further question. We see the word value here. I haven't seen the word benefit anywhere. Has that been excluded, or should it be assumed that it's embedded in here somewhere?
I do like the old, which I think PMI's walked away from, cost at project, benefit at program, value at portfolio. Mm-hmm. I think that was the old way of looking at it. You know, the PMBOK 7 brought value down to the project level. It was all about value. And I think that was somewhat of a big mistake, because it wasn't looking at the whole schema, the project program portfolio schema, me personally. No, I think benefits is a narrower view than value.
Okay.
To me, benefits is more stuff that you can actually measure, and then value has, you know, in somewhat the unmeasurable stuff in it too.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not an easy task, right? It's not an easy way to kind of figure it out what those value propositions are. And I would contend, though, having the discussion is what's important. As Becky kind of said, there's been some tasks that kind of walk down this path, but there's been no systematic process by which it's constantly coming up and making you think about, oh, are we still doing the right thing? We're doing it right, but is it the right thing? You know, that whole thing.
So who should be managing and organizing these discussions, these conversations?
I think this is a different way to go into leadership of whatever organization, company that you're in, and start with this value chain discussion, and then say, how do you want to be organized? And if you want to, in general, projectize yourself, right, then this is the benefit of taking a project program portfolio approach within your company, within your structure. The Department of Defense, I would say, is the original project-oriented organization for all its investments. We've been doing it since the early 60s. I mean, it's literally where earned value comes from, right? Some of you know that my father wrote some of the original criteria back in 63 and 64, because that's his experience out of the weapons system program offices that were from way back. You know, so we've been doing it in the Defense Department now for over 60 years. And so I look at this as a significant change to now move from that program focus to a portfolio focus, and we have to move to that to have this value discussion.
Yeah. A word I'm hearing, John, a lot, and it's come out only this year really, but it may tie in with this, is the word adaptive.
Yeah.
And should we really be thinking about not shoehorning everything into an absolute locked-in framework, but really shaping so that this kind of work in the context of value is in the right shape to actually achieve that value. And so adaptive is coming out far more. So again, the sin of changing the baseline, a lot of estimators are arguing should go away. You know, you should the baseline should be towards the delivery of value rather than meeting a cost target, for example.
Yeah, but I would be careful. A lot of what I read is people who have never liked cost estimating, never liked being under a baseline, never liked being measured. And so now they're saying, oh, we want to be adaptive. We need to be adaptive in this.
Yeah.
I'm still a firm believer you need to be measuring yourself against something. And in any strategy book you read will tell you need to snap that baseline and measure yourself against something. Now, be willing to change, right? But we still need to snap the baseline.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Right.
I think just be more ready to do that. But using it as a management tool rather than to enable, rather than to chastise.
Yeah, I think. Look, I've delivered thousands of software programs in my career. I understand the flexibility that you need when you're building purely software programs that are going on hardware that you're not managing the hardware. And those are like mini projects, man. You can just be going through them. So, but that is not scalable to building a fighter aircraft where integration can break you and kill people. So think the adaptive is there, but as we go larger, as we scale up, and we are integrating software and hardware together with other things, I still think we need the discipline. We need to walk through these things. This study from the Arizona State University, I think, is you just can't argue with what was done here. That when you're in large projects, that following those mature processes, you got to go look at like the 55 processes they looked at. It wasn't just earned value. It was a variety of things that they looked at, right? It was cost, schedule, performance measurements, risk, and wasn't perfect, but the the fit on that curve is just, stark. I mean, it's just true to life, right? You need to have management bought into the game and using the data. And I think that's part of the problem. You have leadership that says they want to have a bunch of measures, then they make decisions that they don't use the data. And that's a big problem. Becky, you had a question?
Yeah, just a brief one. How do you get your stakeholders outside of those involved in the process to start thinking value? I don't hear those discussions from people involved in the congressional process, for example, all the staffers. They don't talk value. They barely talk benefits.
Well, this is if you go back and read the paper I wrote for PMI back in 2017, this
right.
is it's 2025. The 809 report came out in 2019, so we're even 6 years after the commission report that Congress commissioned. I'm just happy that we are now at this point where we're going to start to walk this path. It's not going to be, it's like when we first created PEOs back in 1986 under Goldwater Nichols, right? The evolution of the PEO over the next 10 years was substantial. First they were in Washington, and then they went out in the field, and then they came back, and then they went back in the field, and then they were directorates again, as well as PEOs, and responsible for people not responsible. I mean, we've kind of played around with a variety of different structures with them. I think we're going to go through another iteration of that as we walk down this path. But I am seeing on the mission side, people starting to use the term that, here's a set of missions. I'm going to put this in a mission portfolio.
Yeah, I'm not as concerned about inside the DoD system so much as all those people on the outside, whether it's Congress, whether it's the contractors to DoD. Is there a communications plan that is going to get them talking the talk and walking the walk?
Well, this is why we wrote the paper with PMI over to Congress to say, call out the ANSI standard for portfolio management.
Yeah, I just don't see that having as ubiquitous a communication push behind it as might be needed, but yeah.
I can't speak for what the Defense Department's going to do as they go to implement all of this. We're one cog in the wheel trying to influence what's going on. I will say that PMI has been good about trying to do some of that influencing, and we'll just have to see where it goes. But I think the change is coming, and I think we ought to watch what is going on. I think the services, the Air Force, Space Force, Marine Corps, Navy, Army are all going to take a little different approach to it, and we'll just have to see how it pans out. Should be a fun ride. All right. Well, I think we're at the top of the hour here, Steve. I always try to keep my SPI at 1 or whatever, right? We're done, so it's going to be 1 anyway, so it's all right.
Yeah, it's 1. That's good. Any final words of wisdom, John?
No, just try it out. I don't think there is a one way of doing this. Hopefully, this has got your thinking cap on, and let's let's try some of this stuff out. Just don't think projects and programs. I'm encouraging, Panos and I were on the earned value standard in 2019 for PMI. There is an appendix about measuring benefits and value as part of earned value. I think that was in 2019. I think we're ready to. I think we're going to be ready here in a couple of years to put some real meat more into that and pull it out of the appendix and put it in the core document.
Yeah, well, I believe we put some words into the EVM revision, the second edition that's coming out, I think, early next year, the EVM ISO standard. What's that, Becky? 21508?
Yeah.
And we got some words about the integration of benefits in there too, so this kind of feeling of, dare I say, earned benefit. There's a lot of thought.
Mark,
but also,
Mark has a question.
Real quick,
Mark,
a final shot over the bow.
Yeah.
How do we deal with companies like Microsoft who are decommissioning their platforms for effective project management with the note that earned value stuff is niche for advanced organizations? Yes, they said that this week.
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
I think the question is whether the advanced organizations the ones that are going to survive.
Well, my opinion is Microsoft will make a lot of money because they're marketing to people who never wanted to manage projects in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's a big community.
I think there's more. I think the tool set is going to. We've done. I work with Nick Pisano at SNA Software with his Proteus Envision tool. And we did a 6-month study within the Defense Department showing this linkage work. And it's all doable. It's all doable without writing code, of using the COTS products on the table. We did a little bit of that decision analytics with the combining risky project with the Proteus tool. Our schema here was to pull the vertical schedules into the Proteus database and then push them back out in a horizontal view, so you didn't have to retype the data and everything else. And I think there are methods to do this, but it is going to take good tool sets to do that. And Microsoft Project isn't going to be the one that's going to do that for you either.
No, the challenge is I'm working inside one of those federal agencies under GSA regs on the reporting of earned value. And
right.
The platform they've been using for 12 years is end of life.
Yeah.
1 year out.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting, I would say, and this may be something that the other federal agencies could watch, is what is defense then going to do with its tool sets? Because it needs to put a new emphasis on the tool sets. And that's one thing this administration is asking for the data. If you look at who the Deputy SecDef is, he's a stock, management guy, who has made his billions of dollars by running optimization tools in the portfolio world. So he's used to looking at the data, and he's asking those questions. And I think there's going to be a new emphasis on putting money on the data systems, because we don't have the right data systems to do this the right way.
Darryl, go on, Mark. Sorry.
Yeah,
no, go ahead.
Just one statement with John and Mark and what you guys were talking about how Microsoft is really pushing to move towards automation and AI in their systems, including Microsoft Project. I believe we need humans in the loop, so I'm pretty sure we're going to adopt and push back to Microsoft in regards to their huge shift change, because the consumer market, yes, they're all about agents. However, in complex and real data, it doesn't work that way in real world.
I fear that Microsoft will respond the same way they've done previously and say we're going to lead that to third-party vendors to build add-on solutions.
Watch this space.
Here's the interesting thing is whether we stay with, with the IPM DAR structure in the Defense Department, so now you can share data across different data systems. If you're following what you're doing, I think we need to do that in risk, so we can share risk data, because we can't do that in risk anymore, right? Or at all, right? We can't take Saffron risk, Deltex risk, Primavera's risk, and share risk data across, right? We don't have a standard terminology like we have in scheduling that the DoD drove with the IPM DAR data structure, right? And so as long as those things keep evolving, then it really doesn't matter what tool you have. You can swap your tools out, because now we're open data systems. And that
has been quick question, I think, if we could get to that. Paul?
Working at University of Manchester, just looking at the ownership of the estimate at the beginning, and then tracking that to delivery, find out there's a difference between the cost drivers and the estimated stage, and then the project delivery cost drivers are different, and that's what sends things over proposed. That's one of the factors which sends projects over cost. And there's also this continuous debate about ownership of the estimate at the front end, whether it's been biased to enable project delivery, which I think you've alluded to anyway. But there's always that conversation about front end and then delivery. The drivers are different, the ownership's different, and then perhaps in a complex system, I've seen in utilities where a business case is delivered by a set of different people who, the people who deliver are different from the people who develop the front end, and the behavior is a different thing than it was envisaged to be. So people are adapting or trying different things to meet budgets which they didn't own in the first place. So maybe there's a behavior aspect to this. Overall, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've always had a problem with the fact that you do the cost estimate, and then the risks that are buried in the cost estimate, the assumptions, aren't well transferred to the program team, because that's not standardized data. The cost estimating tools don't translate risk data to the program management tools. That's been my experience. We need to standardize those data sets. More transparency.
Agree with the standardization, John, definitely. And I think you'll find that there are some like-minded souls in the UK, and we're shaping up with an estimating standard at the moment in the UK, and the common data sets are high on the agenda there. So watch this space.
Yeah.
Right. I think 1812 is a good time. The 1812 is normally an overture, but this time we're going to have to use it as closing music. I'd like to thank John very much. Certainly lots of food for thought here, and lots of opportunities to get creative on how we push through and do this and get it done. But I think it's an absolute priority. I'm confident that the the computing power exists to put all of this together, because a few years ago it would have been an excuse that we just don't have the systems big enough to cope with this. But I'm sure they now exist, and this opportunity to have real-time portfolio management rather than have a look at the strategy once or twice a year and adjust the portfolio is long since gone. We can't hide behind that. We have to have that real-time approach to this work as we shape and move organizations forward in the work we're doing. And above all, I love the idea of mission in my head, that sparking outcomes, outputs, purpose, rationale, call it what you will. They are multifaceted. and they can and should be joined together. That you say there are synergies. I was thinking more old-fashionedly that there are also buried in there economies of scale, as we used to call them as well.
Yep.
You know, you get more done for less, but just as efficiently and effectively, or more efficiently and effectively. So I'd like to thank you, John, everybody for listening. Becky, any final closing words apart from good night? Are you there still? Becky with us?
I had to run off to therapy.
Ah, right. Okay. I'm going to run along and do some myself, I think, in a minute.
We all need therapy up to
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah,
it's the same kind.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, as I said, thanks again to John. We have recorded. We're coming up to nearly an hour and a half's worth of material. We will redact that, look at it, check with everybody that what's good to go can be made available. That availability should be sometime early next week, I would hope. So on that note, it's drawing to the end of the afternoon here in London. I imagine you're either going to lunch or coming back from lunch over in the States, but look forward to seeing you in a month or so's time for the next edition of the Global Conversation Club. So travel safely, see you again soon, and good night or good evening. Good afternoon, I will say.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Steve.
Goodbye.